Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Coach's Corner. Coach, for those of you that are new here, is an acronym that stands for the Conduit of Optimism, Altruism, Consciousness, and Health. And I am your host, Jeffrey Hartford. I am your conduit. And today I've brought on a guest that I'm really thrilled to have on, Logan Duvall of Sowing Prosperity. Logan, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time out for us.
I appreciate you having me, brother.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, man, I've dug deep into a lot of your work, and I'm really inspired by, your story about your son Lander and his cancer diagnosis, and you digging into it and learning so much about it. And I am curious. I'd love to hear kind of some of the backstory on what started Sowing Prosperity, about the story about Lander. And, as we were just chatting before I hit record, I'll tell the audience real quick how I would love to get into some of your stuff and we can go that way, but you threw it back at me too and said you'd like to hear some of my story and about my diagnosis and such. So we'll go there as well, but I'll give you the floor for a little bit. Tell us about Lander, about Sowing Prosperity, and yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, my oldest of four kids was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer when he was 5. And that set me off to just kind of like full blown daddy mode. I said early on, the doctors were going to do their part, God's going to do his part, and I'm going to do mine. And so, what was mine? What was the parental role of a child with a stage 4 diagnosis? And so, just voraciously attacked every resource I could. And so, early on, the biohacking realm, Dave Asprey was big influence on creating awareness around different avenues around diet or supplements, and then the technology, right? Just started bringing things that I had never thought about together. And uh, I remember sitting there and then asked the oncologist, like, "What do we eat? What do we do?" I was like, "Well, nothing, just whatever. That doesn't matter." I'm like, oh, but that really just doesn't set well with me. That defeatist mindset's not something I'm willing to accept. Like we're gonna do something. So from that, as I read early on, everything cancer related was very much plant based, right? So like the China study, and you have to have this alternative means. It's all no chemo, no medicine, no nothing, or and go all alternative or only that, right? It was never any sort of like a hybrid options anywhere. And as as you learn and then you have these conversations with your oncologist, like they don't want to have a conversation outside of the big three: chemo, radiation, surgery. Like outside of that, they really don't want to talk about it. And so I would ask about the microbiome. And I had an oncologist for 40 years, been an oncologist for 40 years. I had just read a study on immunotherapies, and depending on what bacteria is in there, it would work or not. I said, "What do we do? What is this? What does this mean?" Like I'm excited. Like immunotherapy is working for people. It's like I don't know anything about the microbiome. So I just started seeing these big gaps in knowledge, or maybe these intentional blinders, and just started questioning more and more and more. And so with that said, China Study was first, and then I got a hold of Dr. Stephen Gundry's book, The Plant Paradox, and started making me question diet. And I think that was probably a podcast interview with Dave Asprey that Gundry did that got me down that rabbit trail. And so uh, started questioning plants and started trying to figure out, well, what is the appropriate diet? Like if there are positives with plants in cancer, but there's also negatives. I'm like, what is going on here? And so breaking that down is like I've got to be able to find people that I trust. And so from that, there's so many different authors like Ken Berry. Ken had a book, Lies My Doctor Told Me, early on, and I was like, my brain just straight up shut down. It shut down. What do you mean carnivore? What do you mean? I just read the China study. I know plants cause cancer. What are you talking about, Ken? And so you get this situation where it's just overwhelming with the vast opinions that are out there, and that led me down to starting Sowing Prosperity from like the podcast model of being able to have access to these experts in their field and start trying to weave it together. So that's kind of the foundation. I own a farmers market, so I'm very involved in the food system and local, and trying to help people in a way that it just kind of makes sense through economy and health. But also we need to have like the best people in the world giving advice as we build it out.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting too. When we think about nutrition, as you just alluded to, there's so many different holes that we can take it down, and so much dogma within that. That whether it's the extreme of vegan or the extreme of carnivore, the more I've dug into some of this quantum biology, it's given me a little bit more insight to understand that maybe depending on where we live, there's a case to be made for each of them in some combination seasonally. Keto, carnivore more for the fall, winter months, at least for those of us up here in the Northeast. And then during the spring and summer, when the weather calls for it and we can actually grow more produce, maybe at that point we can be consuming more of that, which makes an awful lot more sense, but probably not wanting to get rid of the meats and the animal products altogether. That takes us into some of the deuterium conversation, that if this heavy water, we know there's much less of it in the meat, in the fat, much more of it in the produce. And a couple of the different ways that we get rid of it from the body is through things like sweating, and then our normal waste elimination, urination, defecation, breathing, so on and so forth. But during these months where it's not as hot, so we're not sweating as much, and some of those foods that are higher in deuterium, well, we also have to ship it in because it's not growing locally. So it really is, to your point, this degree of the infighting. If we're talking, nutrition is still only one aspect of all of it, and there's just so much infighting in there, and nobody can wrap their heads around it. And I can't help but it makes me think of Dr. Jack Krus's work, as we talked about before we hit record too, that he just seems to get it in a way that most don't. And it makes me wonder how many of them that are fighting from the dogmatic side of it are just put in there to be distractions. Nobody's talking about the light story that Jack brought to all our perception. Now I'm aware of it in such a way that getting my circadian rhythm in sync and getting that sunrise on my skin and my eyes every day is such a priority. And, really just maximizing my exposure to the sun while it's out, and then minimizing any exposure to the artificial lights, to the blue lights, to all these things. So, and I'm sure you've dug very deep into that stuff too. I've seen plenty of your episodes where you get a whole lot deeper into it than I do. So we'll consider this I scratched the surface, but I'll throw it to you and let you add a little bit more to some of that for us as well.
Yeah, that's all very extremely important topics. And again, like if this is somebody's first time, like I have cancer, what do I do? Conversation, it can get overwhelming very fast, right? But being much more in sync with nature is so much of the solution. It's not as overly complicated as we make it out to be, right? The illness and disease that we have for the vast majority is going to be lifestyle. Like that's the cause, right? It's 100%. It's these lights that are in my face right now, right? That is terrible for me. Like I understand that. So to your point with the circadian aspect of the nature cycles, that morning sunrise is great, right? The darkness at night is great. The being out there, full spectrum light. Because if you look at the rainbow, like you got 6, 7 colors there, what all do they do? They all do something, right? That is very important to biology. We don't get the UVB, we don't get the melanin, we don't get the vitamin D synthesis of the middle of the day because we're working or we're in school or we're just not living a life that is in accordance to nature. So when you go down that quantum biology rabbit trail and realize that cancer is a metabolic disease, it just absolutely is. Siegfried's done a good job of creating that awareness around that. I think I think there's more to it. I don't prescribe to his entire philosophy, but when you get that light right and the motors can work, like the motors in our body, it really simplifies and gets things. But back, you'd mentioned diet. Like this is part of why a ketogenic diet works, and it's very efficacious for cancer because it gets that timing back on, right? The timing with nature. And we, at one point, I had that mentality of the one size fits all kind of approach. It's cancer, you have to do a ketogenic diet, right? The big thing with keto is that it helps us get that alignment of timing back in. And that's why keto is such a powerful, powerful tool. But we also have to apply that to these seasons, right? When is keto appropriate? Right? Because it is. It's not appropriate 12 months out of the year. Like, it's just not. And that also depends on your geography. So if you're in Costa Rica, ketogenic diet is probably not going to be like the perfect thing for you all the time. Right? You've also alluded to deuterium, and that's also part of this timing mechanism that gets thrown off. When you understand that the mitochondria actually are these amazing little light machines that they produce water, they produce their own light, they produce CO2, they produce ATP, they do all kinds of functions in the body, and as well as biosensor. Then you realize, man, it's a little more complicated than we learned in seventh grade science. Of It's the powerhouse of the cell, and so you've got to have the appropriate environment for that to function properly. And when we take care of the mitochondria, then everything really seems to work so much better. And so, to that point of Dr. Cruz, the light water magnetism, that is all about getting timing back in with nature, and it is profoundly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel it myself, as I told you before I hit record, and for anyone that's listened to some of my previous episodes, they may have heard me talk about it recently, but back in June, I was diagnosed with a tumor on my kidney. And, the doctor said it's more likely than not cancer was his diagnosis. For different reasons, we agreed we weren't going to do a biopsy to find out. His reasoning was he just wanted to remove it. My reasoning was I trust in my body's innate ability to heal itself, and we're not going to remove it. And I'm going to monitor it. We'll keep track of it. And I've had a couple of days that were less than optimal. Whether it's continued blood in the urine and clotting and such, or some back pain. But man, I'll tell you what, when I tap into what Dr. Cruz talks about and I get myself outside, some of my most comfortable moments in those uncomfortable times was laying in my backyard with my shirt off, my body just touching the ground, and the sun touching my skin. And it's incredible. I could feel my batteries recharging. I could feel myself getting in sync with nature. And even in those moments where I knew I didn't feel great, and it's a big part of this is the faith aspect, and just this intuitive sense I have. When I got my diagnosis, I felt this rush of energy from my feet all through my body, all the way up to my head, culminating in a big smile. And as the doctor told me, Jeffrey, I don't know why you have this. That energy I felt was just pure peace and calm. There was not an ounce of fear or worry or anxiety. And I said to him, I said, Doc, I know this is going to sound kind of crazy, but I'm going to say it anyway. I said, I feel like I might know. I feel like I maybe manifested this because I've felt called. The more I learn about the human body and the more stories that I've heard of people who have recovered through what we label as a spontaneous remission, right? Just this miraculous thing. We don't know what it is. In allopathic medicine, we didn't do anything to cure it, but it just resolved. And there's so many people that have had that story, many of which are oncologists themselves that opt not to go their standard of care treatment. And I learned this over the years, and I shared it with everybody because I'm just that person. I'm so passionate about helping people in the human body that as I hear these stories, I really want to share it with people. But I also recognize that, by trade, if you will, I'm a massage therapist slash exercise, corrective exercise specialist, personal trainer, whatever we want to call it. I'm no doctor. And as we know, with allopathic medicine, Western medicine, if you're a doctor, you're on a pedestal. You have this godlike complex in so many ways, and that's who people will listen to. So I recognize that I can only share so much information that I've learned semantically. But now I believe I've been gifted with this opportunity to teach people firsthand what the body's capable of. And I don't think that my healing journey is going to be anything unique to me outside of maybe my mindset being in the right place at the right time, but I'm just showing people what we're capable of. And I do understand that with Lander, you did do a little bit of combination of the two. So, it's interesting. As I said, your story touches my heart so much from the perspective of being a dad myself, and now in light of the diagnosis. I would imagine you would agree wholeheartedly. Me getting the diagnosis for myself versus my child was a whole lot easier for me to accept and to hit the ground running the way that I am. So I guess in that whole story, I'm not really tabling a question per se, but I'll throw it to you and we'll get your reaction to that.
Yeah, I think every situation is extremely challenging, and they're unique. So I wouldn't want one or the other, like at all. Like you can't, you have to just play with the hand you're dealt, right? Like I would never wish any of these situations on anybody, much less one versus the other, But
Sure.
for uh, it's also one of those things where you go back, like, what would you do different? Well, the lander went from stage 4 to cancer free in 8 months. Like, what would I do for different? Like, why would I change that? Right? Like, so there's so many things I would have maybe added or done, but like, I'm very grateful for the way that journey, as hard and terrible as it was, it played out. So the continued learning is about mitigating side effects, doing prevention, doing uh, and a service to be able to help other people learn different tidbits that can apply to them. So like, for example, it was stage 4 kidney cancer, right? So like we got a little bit of that going on there. But man, for you, I think it's so unbelievably important to do what Jack preaches, but there's also some, cancer's not his world either, right? Like
Mhm.
he's not a cancer expert. He is a neurologist, right? A neurosurgeon. So the the cancer realm is very unique because we also don't have an agreed upon what is cancer, right? Like I have talked to cancer experts from across the world, and we do not have an agreement on what is cancer. So you have to take into account a lot of these different specialties. So, for example, when I did talk to Jack for the very first time, I said, "What do I do for my son?" And he's like, "Well, he has to have a tan on his back and stay off the devices." And I'm like, "What? What, a tan?" I asked you what he had cancer. What are you talking about? So that led you down the rabbit trail of melanin and understanding mitochondrial function and how light impacts biology. Like Roland Van Wyck's book is priceless, right? It's so deep. There, you get into where you understand that light affects biology, and that has a profound effect on cancer. All right. So you also have to layer in who else is getting results. Like who else is getting results with overcoming cancer? Well, there's Dr. William Mankis, right? He's huge in putting out recently the fenbendazole, ivermectin. Why are these antiparasitics working? Why do they have efficacy in cancer? You've got Naisha Winters, who I absolutely love, and she brings in this whole range of things from mistletoe therapy to ketogenic diet to she also incorporates light, right? And then deuterium. Well, that leads us down into what Dr. Boros, Dr. Chemalier, Petra. There's a focus on deuterium that throw in this, and so my big advice would be there's a lot of things to consider, but if we're navigating something as significant as a cancer diagnosis, I think that you've got to have the resources that you trust. As Jack says, the know who packs your parachute, and working with somebody like that, I think is of the utmost importance to make sure that you're staying on top of it too. And you know what, Petra's a dear friend, and I can't recommend her enough as far as that resource, whether it's her podcast or working directly with her, because we have to account for some other really, really significant things, and that is cancer changed in 2020. Cancer changed in 2020. So when you go back to the entire story, I'm trying not to get your channel banned because I've been in enough trouble to having this conversation. But when you go back to the polio story and you understand what happened with the Cutter incident, when you understand what Jonas Salk and Alton Ochsner and that crew in New Orleans discovered around the polio vaccine, it is very eye-opening to know that something such as a monkey virus that was found in that vaccine that causes cancer was put into millions and millions and millions and millions of people, right? And then we just so happen to have the war on cancer declared in 1971. Just, I don't think that's a coincidence. So now, when we fast forward to 2020, we now have some pretty significant cancer pathophysiology changes, and that has to be taken into account. And so the what worked in 18 may not be working in 2024.
Yeah, that's a valid point, and I'm with you. I'll temper what I'll say just so we can make sure this episode stays up. But I'm getting the message there, and it's interesting too because what you're alluding to, the big question becomes, even for those that didn't necessarily partake in this treatment that could have played that role. We talk about shedding, and we talk about it could that in some capacity play a role as well, just being around people that did partake. So yeah, there's a lot of questions there, and it's, you bring up a great point. I'll definitely be looking into Petra. I think that's really important because there's, maybe off camera we'll chat a little bit more about this, just to get a few things from you before we end it later. But um, I'll go with a hard segue for a moment and just say mindset is something to me that plays a massive role with all this too. And with that in mind, what I happened to see one of your videos with Lander where he had his drink and he had his superpowers and he was able to beat Spider-Man in the arm wrestling match. Man, that speaks to me because I'll pull in a little bit of Dr. Joe Dispenza too. This concept of thinking it and believing it, having this heart and mind coherence. And I like to take that just a step further, that we have to think it, we have to believe it, and our actions have to match. And man, I'll tell you what, I shared this with a client the other day. And after I said it out loud, I told him, I said, I think I just channeled this because that wasn't a conscious thought I had had up until now. And I didn't think it was something that I thought consciously at that moment. But I said, that diagnosis did not feel like it was my diagnosis. It felt like it was the diagnosis of a previous version of me who has already died, because the lifestyle that he led that very well created this diagnosis, I no longer lead. And with kidney tumors especially, my understanding thus far anyway is that they're a very slow growing tumor, and especially where the degree to which that I've monitored recently, it has shown that it has not grown. It wasn't changing at my last scan compared to the previous one. And that kind of adds into that element that they're slow growing tumors. So the size of it indicates that this could have been around for upwards of 30 years. And 30 years ago, I was a 13-year-old kid who was super sensitive, super emotional, had an internal amount of sadness that manifested into anger. And we know anger for sure is an environment that's going to change the chemistry of your blood, which is the environment your cells live in. That chemistry changing in such a way, the environment that creates, well, sure, of course, your cells aren't going to do very well there. And I've grown a lot in that capacity too. There's still room for improvement. But yeah, I think that plays a massive role, and I'm not beyond the aspect of recognizing my active role in this. So while I know I segued really hard off of the point you brought up last, which is such a valid point, and I don't want the listeners to be just kind of saying, hey, we want more on that. But there's the aspect to your point is very well taken, that there's something in there that could have played a role. But I also believe wholeheartedly that life that I previously led and that environment that I created internally previously played a massive role in it. And that's where there's quite a distinction between a now 43-year-old versus Lander when he got his diagnosis. Yeah, I'm pretty sure at his age there was something else going on, and it wasn't that he can sit there and say, "Hey, I played an active role in this, Daddy." But as I reflect upon it for myself, I feel like I did, and I feel like I've made a lot of those changes already. So again, as I'm sharing part of my story with it, it's not as if I'm following it up and throwing a question to you, but again, I'll throw it to you and we'll get your reaction to all that.
I think you're absolutely spot on. I don't know that we can ever identify a singular thing, right? But to your point on the emotions, and as we go into more of the esoteric, the frequencies and things, we you're sitting there drinking water. Water's got memory. Water is an antenna for everything, whether that's all frequencies. That includes light. That includes emotions. And so there is a connection with kidneys and emotion. And so one thing that I feel deeply convinced played a role among other things, right? Because it's all a combination of insults that lead to the disruption. Let's just call it the disruption of timing, the metabolic disorder that ends up being cancer is emotions. And kids are so receptive, and I think that my anger, my hatred, my inability to forgive played a role into my son's cancer.
Mm.
So like I don't think it was him, right? Like I think it was the environment, the decisions that I made, right, as a parent. That I mean, it's even more so on me, right? So the vaccine reactions he had when he was little played a role. The he has gene variation MTHFR, crammed folic acid, synthetic B6 in him, right? We or B9. We did all these insults, including the emotions. I was very angry, right? Like a very angry, very, very, very angry person growing up, and just life didn't deal with things well. And so I very early on went into a health food store and was just like, just went in, right? Like just look at this wall of supplements and what do I do? And one of the ladies came up and she said, God wants me to tell you something. I'm like, what? Right? What? And she's like,
Hmm.
I feel you have a lot of hatred and unforgiveness in your heart. Doesn't know me from Adam, right? And I just got chills again. And I was like, well, for one, you're right, right? Like you're 100% right. And so that led me down to a self-reflection, right? A self-reflection for the environment, because the emotions you give off, the frequencies you give off affect your household. Right, whoever you're with, you feel that when you're around certain people, you're just drained, or you're around other people and you feel just charged. And so, as I dove back into Scripture, right, I'm looking for everything. Again, I said the doctor's going to do their part, God's going to do His part. So, what is God's my role with God? And so, the Bible speaks specifically about forgiving in order to be forgiven, right? And so that caused me to in an instant forgive every transgression that I felt was done to me, and instantly forgave and let go of every hate. And it it is such an important topic that you brought up, that mindset, but that forgiveness. We've got to we have all had terrible, terrible, terrible things done to us. Betrayals, hurt, just horrible things, trauma that have caused us to have the legitimate feelings, right? But when we forgive and we turn it over to God and we focus on what we can control, man, it's magic.
Oh man, it truly is. You getting me worked up over here. That's I don't know when it was. I don't know what the catalyst was, but at some point in my life, I finally listened to the premise of just being authentic. You know, I've got a kind of a checklist, if you will, of things that I go through. It's authenticity, humility, vulnerability, and adaptability. And I think probably shortly before COVID, I would say, is where it really started, because it's all been about meditation for me and self reflection. And since I was a kid, I knew there was something about me. And I don't want to word that in a way that makes it sound like I'm special any more than each and every single one of us is special. But I knew there was something in me that I wasn't cultivating. And I didn't know why. I never learned how to step outside of a comfort zone and step off the common path. You know, it's like, well, my friends are on this path, so I'm going to stay with them, even though, well, it doesn't feel like it's where I'm supposed to go, but I'll do it. And at some point, I decided to start doing it, and I got to tell you, man, I'm literally, you gave me chills a moment ago, and I'm so grateful for these types of conversations. We have a long way to go in our culture, but men talking the way we're talking right now and having that degree of vulnerability and recognizing this anger that can form, the more guys that I'm able to talk to about these things and be transparent and be vulnerable, it opens the door for them to do the same. And I'm not trying to tell them that they have a problem. I'm sharing with them the problems of myself that I've recognized. And now being able to do so to such a degree of, when I got my diagnosis, I was at peace. It was like, this isn't happening to me. This is happening for me. And oh, by the way, I played a very active role in it. And it's pushing me further down this path of being my authentic self, which has given me kind of the courage, if you will, to ask somebody such as yourself to come on my podcast, to ask Dr. Cowan that came on previously, Dr. Giangrande that came on previously, people that the imposter syndrome in me would have said, well, who the hell am I to have the audacity to think that they're going to come on my little show? And then you just get the courage, you do it, and you just have an authentic conversation. And man, there's something special. The story you just told has still got me chills. Like, that threw me for a loop, because you can go into a conversation like this and have all your plans and your notes, and hey, I've watched a lot of your episodes, I think I have an idea of where we're going. But to just be open, honest, and transparent can open things up and create something unique. Man, I'm super grateful for this.
Brother, I understand. I think I had a D in public speaking in college, right? Like, I hated being around, a large group of people, or on a stage, or just in front of a classroom was just absolutely terrifying. But when Lander was diagnosed, and I figured out that this happened for a reason, and it is an opportunity to serve and help other people. I quit caring what that perception of me that held me back was. Like, I don't, it doesn't bother me to get in front of a room, a huge crowd right now, because it's not about me. When we take ourself out of it, and we look at that service aspect, man, it makes all of it really easy too.
Sure does. Yeah, the late teen to early 20 something version of me that wanted, or thought he wanted, some level of um, audience, fame, whatever it was. I'm so grateful I didn't get it back then, because it was all driven by ego, and it was all for the wrong reasons. And I'm so with you right now. Right now, it isn't about me. It's about, if my story can help somebody else, then I'm happy to share my story, all flaws and vulnerabilities and all. And the more I share that, the more I empower other people to do the same. And the more we do that, the more we create better versions of ourselves, and the more we can all do that, man, this place is going to turn into a whole lot better place, the more of us that do it. And I've seen a couple of your posts recently, and I agree wholeheartedly. This movement of Make America Healthy Again, RFK Jr., and I Dr. Cowan and I got a little bit into some of that too, and talked a little bit of politics, which I generally don't do. But I feel like we're moving in the right direction, and there are people that'll disagree with me, and that's okay. They're entitled to, but I feel it in my core that something special is coming, and it has to be about health, and it has to be about transparency and honesty. And enough of these people who are profiting off of us being sick and acting like they didn't know. It seems over and over and over, whether it's food or pharmaceuticals or technology, everything seems to be done in such a way that, oh, whoops, that made you sick. I didn't realize it. I thought it was just making it more efficient for me. I thought it was just making it a more streamlined system for all of us. I just don't have a sense that that's true any longer. And for a long time, I said, I don't want to pretend to be able to assume somebody else's intent. But when you can start to connect the dots, and you have a little bit of an ability towards pattern recognition, there's an awful lot of pattern of more and more and more profit for people at the top, with more and more and more disease and heartache for those at the bottom. And that's got to end. And I sense that it is. I feel like I've said this a lot lately, but we're witnessing the end of what I've labeled the disempowerment paradigm, and we're ushering in the empowerment paradigm. And I believe that we are actively, you and I are a part of that process. And I'm really grateful for it. I think I alluded to it before, but the willingness of myself as little as I'll call myself, to ask somebody to come onto my platform and have these conversations, the more people that I'm doing it within this quantum biology space, within this decentralized medicine place, people are so willing to help and so willing to learn and share and give. And it's not, well, what do I get out of it? It's, yeah, we have a lot of progress that we still have to make, and I want to do it.
I, I think the for the most part, the people in our kind of realm come from a place of hurt, right? And we know what it's like to face this adversity and come through it. And to your point is I tried to come in this giving the benefit of the doubt that maybe it was just the way it played out, but I fully, at this point, believe it has been nefarious intent, all about profit and control, like 100%. Like I don't even give them the benefit of the doubt anymore. Of between government agencies and the corporations, like I 100% like despise them. Like so, like I can't give them the benefit of the doubt anymore. And so with the new administration, I pray that it is the case that they do what they have been saying they're going to do. But at the end of the day, if they do or if they don't, the power's not in them. They're not our savior coming in here to fix everything and save us, and like we have nothing to do but sit on the couch and all things are going to be perfect. Like it's time to go to freaking work. Put the boots on, put the overalls on, have these frank discussions, and then choose to make the right decisions, right? The decisions that don't make Walmart bigger, that don't feed Tyson, that don't, and both of those are headquartered in my state.
Mm.
Right? Those are both Arkansas companies. So when I say that out loud, I'm absolutely blasphemous. I am a absolute crazy person. You know, in Arkansas, University of Arkansas, the Razorbacks are our professional team, right? The college is like our world. We love it. And the two logos that are on those fields are Walmart and Tyson. So when I say things like that, as hyperbolic as they may be, like I believe it wholeheartedly, and I'm going against all of my friends and family when I point that out. What we have to do to get to work, to get this health, because the reason it resonates is because people are tired of being sick. People are tired of being sick. That's why they're looking for solutions. That's why I have doctors come to me every day, nurses, PAs that say, what do we do? Because this method isn't working, right? We have got to support our local farmers that are decentralized. We've got to support our local farmers that are feeding us. We've got to eat in a seasonal and local and natural manner. That's how we fight back. Take away the money from them and shift it towards our own communities, our own neighbors that are feeding us, that are building out these localized, strong food systems. That's the solution. And then what happens is we become healthier. Our communities become stronger. We know our neighbors. We have conversations where you realize the crap they're putting on TV isn't actually our reality. That's the one that they're manifesting and making you think is our reality. We get back to local, we get back to these decentralized models that truly build resiliency. Quit playing their freaking games. I mean, that's where it's on us. Nobody's going to come in and save us. It's on us individually to make these decisions.
100% true. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it makes me think this whole concept of germ theory versus terrain theory. And I know you're big into regenerative agriculture, and I'm a massive advocate for it. I've been fortunate to discover there's a couple of local farms in my area that I order my beef from, I order my pork from. I have a chest freezer. I've got my next one coming up next month, and I can't wait to get it. And I talk about them all the time. In fact, I had his name's Bennett. I had Bennett on about a year and a half, 2 years ago now, talking about his farm. And coincidentally, it worked out that he was leaving the farm he was working at where I had met him to go start his own, he and his wife. And he made the announcement on the podcast with me. It was so wonderful to hear. I was so proud of him. And I just keep sending people his way. This idea of there's that parallel between our body internally, the terrain internally, and the terrain that we're growing our food in. It's so vital that we go this regenerative route and we build the soil up, that this dense microbiome of the soil, just like our gut microbiome. And there's such a parallel there. And man, well, that could be a whole nother discussion for us, obviously. But I'm with you, and I'm grateful to hear that's what you're into as well. And I'm with you. You're spot on. I will hope and pray that this new administration will do the things that we believe they will, and that a lot of what we heard they said they would. But whether they do or whether they don't, it is on us. You're spot on, and I'm ready. I'm playing my game, and I'll do what I'll do.
That's all we can do. It doesn't matter if we've just got diagnosed with cancer or whatever adversity is. Like, we focus on what we can control and what has that biggest needle mover. We execute on that, and a lot of stuff just kind of takes care of itself.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Now, one last thing I'll throw in there is, with the comparison of regenerative agriculture and cancer, it makes me think of Dr. Zach Bush. I've heard him talk recently about cancer, and he believes we have such a bad perception of it. And in so many cases, it truly seems to be the treatments and the treatment not paired with the other stuff, as you were able to do with Lander, that leads to the actual death. But the cancer itself is a fight for survival. It's this awareness of these cells in the body that they have become separate from the rest of the body, the rest of the group, if you will, and that in this feeling of aloneness, they go in this replication pattern, which is still about life. That's not about death, but we have to recognize that, okay, what did we do to create this environment that made that cell feel separate from the rest? And how do we remedy that? And sure, in some scenarios, there is part of the protocol. It can be surgery to remove it. There can be some degree of chemo and radiation we know that can play their role. But I believe in my heart, and I believe it's my path to resolve it without those things. And there are plenty of cases of people that have done that very thing. And I'm going to be the next one. So listen, brother, I can't thank you enough for coming on here. I could absolutely talk to you for hours. I appreciate your wealth of knowledge and your perspective on all this. And I'm so grateful to hear that Lander is cancer-free. God bless him. God bless you. And I know I mentioned at the beginning, Sowing Prosperity, but if people want to find you so it's sowingprosperity.com is the website, right? Sowing Prosperity is your YouTube channel. Well, I won't say it for you. You tell us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're spot on. I'm probably more active on a lot of the stuff with the me and McGee Market stuff, just because that's what pays the bill and where I physically am. But yeah, the Sowing Prosperity is it's honestly, in a lot of ways, it's super selfish. It gives me a reason to be able to talk to these incredible people, but I want to be able to take those conversations and share it with everybody so we can all benefit. But man, it's we're we got work to do. So we just need to make sure we're working on the right things. And that's why, these conversations are really important.
Absolutely right. Well, I'll say this to you with the camera rolling, but I'll also talk a little bit after. But there's a lot of work to be done. I agree. And if there's anything I can do, I know we're states apart, but keep me in the loop. You've got my contact info now. We'll stay in touch, and I'll play my role in whatever capacity I can.
Absolutely, brother. Appreciate the invite, and love the work you're doing.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Everybody, if you haven't already, definitely subscribe to the channel, like, comment, share, all that good stuff you're supposed to do. And I would imagine by now you already have, but if you haven't, go over and subscribe to Sowing Prosperity as well. And until next time, stay well.